Okay, welcome back, everyone. I want to start off by telling you an anecdote from history. The year was 1816, and the French physician René Laennec had just described the new medical breakthrough, cutting-edge breakthrough of the time, the stethoscope. At the time, the Times of London newspaper heralded this revolutionary medical breakthrough, calling the stethoscope, and I quote, "a wonderful instrument that was now in complete vogue in Paris." Yet in the same breath, they dismissed its potential, predicting that the stethoscope, quote, "will never come into general use because it lacks value, its beneficial application requires much time, and gives a good bit of trouble to both the patient and the practitioner. And because its hue and character are foreign and opposed to all of our habits and associations, it's just not going to get used," the stethoscope. It would take nearly 50 years for the stethoscope to gain widespread acceptance by medical doctors in Europe and the US. And in fact, Laennec's original design would undergo quite a bit of modification as well. It started off as a simple wooden hollow cylinder. He called it Le Cylindre. And it was 10 inches long. And it would take another 50 years of refinement and design that led to the modern bell and diaphragm design with rubber tubing, transforming it into the essential tool and symbol of medicine we recognize today. In fact, for countless medical students, the stethoscope, alongside the white coat, marks their official entry into the profession. Now, the adoption of AI in medicine promises a similarly challenging journey, as we've heard in the morning sessions, laden with skepticism and barriers. Yet its potential, by all accounts, to revolutionize healthcare far surpasses that of the stethoscope. And the burning questions remain: how long will it take AI to achieve comparable acceptance and iconic status in healthcare? What obstacles must be addressed, and how can they be overcome? Well, to help me address some of these questions and to explore these critical questions, we brought together a really distinguished panel of experts from across the ecosystem. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Great. Thank you for joining us, and we'll start off by going across the panel and asking you to introduce yourself and tell us about the most exciting aspect of AI from your particular seat or your particular area in the ecosystem. We'll start off with David.
Thanks so much for the invitation. You're ready to have a little bit of Franglish? So I'm David Dellamonica. I'm working for AstraZeneca, and I'm leading the overall precision medicine organization, specifically on the commercial side of my company. So the big pharma are organized by R&D and commercial. So first of all, I think we had some super interesting discussion previously on the how we use AI for R&D, but I would like to bring a little bit of how we use AI on my world, meaning we have drugs, and what we can do with these drugs to make sure that they are touching the patients. We talk a lot about multimodal. In my world, multimodal means how a physician will take action to treat a patient. So actually, we use a variety of different type of modality. And what we see actually is a lot of our pipeline are ultra complex drug environments, meaning that we are touching a lot of different type of specific mechanism. We are touching also a lot of different type of target, and specifically in the oncology setting. So how you can bring a drug to a physician when it's so complex? Just to give you an example, in Sloan Kettering, a guy who is treating a lung cancer patient is using 300 data points just to take a decision on, okay, this is the right treatment, this is the right diagnostic system, etc. So this is super complex, in fact. So, and Sloan Kettering is a high-level hospital. We have tons of community hospitals. We'll have access to different type of data. So I'm super excited by the fact that multimodal for me means using different type of modalities, bringing these modalities in one component, and giving a chance to the physician to take the right action for the right patients. It's not so easy, but we see this happening, and this is what makes me dream of the future. We discussed also some partnership model. I really think it's a key element of the future, in fact, because as pharma industry, we don't have all this capacity to develop this type of technology, so we must partner. It's a survival mode aspect. So we work with a super smart university, but also super smart startups. So what excited me a lot also is the component of how we can partner better with the different people that are in this room.
Great. Regina?
Oh, it's working? Yeah. Okay, hello. It's always embarrassing when you don't know how to use technology, when the next thing I'm going to say, I'm a professor of electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. At any rate, my research, I work on development of machine learning models, and it spans two areas. One is molecular modeling for drug discovery. Some of you already heard about our recent release, BOLT. But we also work on protein design. We co-designed with David Baker's lab RF diffusion. We work on small molecules, on retrosynthesis, you know, through the whole spectrum. On the other end of my work is actually clinical AI, and I'm particularly interested in image-based diagnostics. We developed two tools, one for predicting lung cancer, another one is breast cancer, and as you know, some speakers said that, you know, technology is there, and today it's not very hard to develop one of these algorithms. What is really hard is to bring them to clinical setting and to make them the standard of care. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is looking at issues that arise in large-scale deployment. At MIT, I lead Jamil Clinic, which is Center for Machine Learning and Health. So we have a network of 46 hospitals around the world, in Asia, in Africa, you know, all over really, and in the United States, of course, where we are bringing these tools into a clinical practice, and we're studying how they change patients' outcomes. And more importantly, on my end, what kind of technology do we still need to develop to ensure that these tools are effective and they are safe?
Great. Anthony?
Anthony Philippakis. I started off life as a math nerd and accidentally went to med school and trained as a cardiologist, practiced for many years at the Brigham, and spent about a decade as the chief data officer at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard and an investor at Google Ventures. I'm currently a general partner at Google Ventures where I make investments in both drug development and technology companies. And so the question about what is the biggest opportunity in AI, you know, it's really interesting. Over the last 2 years since the launch of ChatGPT, it's been really interesting to see the investment, especially the venture capital community, wrestle with what are the business models that can be made out of it, and how do we go from an amazing sort of technology to actually a real business. And there's a meme that a lot of people are converging on that I think makes sense to me, and we'll see, time will tell, that the world is going from software as a service to service as software. And so what I mean by that is, over the last 10 years with the rise of cloud, the idea that you would deliver software through the web and it would be a software as a service was a tremendous business. And just the number of great companies that were built under that business model was amazing. What you see now is there are a lot of businesses that are traditionally very human-centric, that were low margin, that they scaled with the number of human beings, were not traditionally sort of venture investable businesses. And so people would not traditionally go into them. So these are things like, you know, accounting companies or consulting companies, law firms. When you look at healthcare, healthcare is incredibly enriched for these fields that are ripe for automation. For example, I saw a pitch deck from a company that, you know, a statistic that really impressed me was the total spend on enterprise software in America right now is about $900 billion per year. The total spend on nursing salaries is $700 billion per year. So you're approximating just on nursing salaries what we spend on all of technology for enterprise as a company. Moreover, I've now seen 3 or 4 different companies that have done really impressive demos with voice-to-voice, showing that you can have nurse quality medical care, things like care coordination. you think about the opportunity to automate a lot of that business, and especially in a time and place where there's a real shortage of healthcare professionals, I think this is a fascinating position to be in.
Great, thanks, Anthony. And Philip?
I'm Philip Tagari, and I'm a recovering pharma bro. I currently serve as the chief scientist at Insitro, a leading AI company. And the thing that I'm perhaps most excited about comes from the last 10 years of my life at Amgen, where I led a very large team that put over 30 first-in-class molecules into clinical development that led to 3 marketed drugs most recently. And that is a terrible success rate. And our aim at Insitro is to use advanced machine learning to really understand disease biology, both in incidence, but importantly in progression and symptomology, to very rapidly develop highly tailored therapeutics, and then bring those tailored therapeutics to the patients that are really going to benefit from it at the right time. And by doing that, to perhaps transform that success rate of delivering medicines to people who really need them from less than 1 in 10 to maybe 50%. There is a huge unmet need for new medicines, and we just need to change the business model by which we do that. And I think that is a great opportunity for advanced machine learning.
So, Philip, I want to build on that, using all of this data to enable accelerated drug development, understanding human biology. As we heard from Eric Topol earlier, there's over 1,000 FDA-approved AI-enabled devices. All of these devices are generating data, but it seems like the data is very fragmented in the ecosystem. So if we're going to get to that sort of vision that David outlined of a holistic AI approach to treatment, data fragmentation seems like a huge barrier to that. So how are you thinking about that in terms of data fragmentation within the ecosystem, and how can we actually address some of those challenges there?
Yeah, so very interestingly, AI actually is quite good with fragmented data. The story I always like to tell people is imagine a patient's health journey is an old Super 8 black and white movie. There's missing data, there's missing sound, there's chunks of the film that have degraded. But we've now all seen those old movies, upscaled to 4K with Dolby sound. And I think there's a real opportunity for AI and machine learning to do the same with a patient health journey, to essentially impute data that may be absent or incorrectly captured. But there's also a huge opportunity in the ecosystem to just, educate physicians, educate providers, educate systems that data is incredibly valuable, okay? And that perhaps the price of entry into those health systems is the fact that you donate your data.
So building on that, Philip, Regina, I want to direct the next question to you. So having data is one thing, but then making use of that data in a practical way, I think, is another challenge, and particularly with regard to things like bias. There's a really eye-opening paper in NPG by a group at Stanford titled The Scoping Review of Reporting Gaps in FDA-Approved AI Medical Devices, where they looked at all of the medical devices and they identified lack of consistency and data transparency in the devices that have been published. And they alluded to how this could lead to segregation and biases in terms of how AI is deployed. So for example, in this paper, they mentioned that only 14.5% of the devices provide race or ethnicity data, only 19.4% provide information related to age, and then of the devices that have been approved, only 0.4%, this blew my mind, this statistic, only 0.4% of the approved devices cater specifically to geriatric health needs, which is the big part of the healthcare ecosystem, geriatric patients. So within that context of lack of data visibility, lack of consistency, and how it could lead to bias, how have you been thinking about the regulatory framework and this concept of bias, and what are the challenges that need to be addressed there to really make this more viable in the healthcare ecosystem?
So thank you for bringing up this question. And to some extent, I'm going to dismiss it, and I will tell you why. Because whenever we are thinking about AI, we're not thinking about a perfect healthcare world where now AI comes in. We're talking about a real world, and there is like endless a number of papers that are written over decades that demonstrate how imperfect and biased is existing healthcare and its standards. So in a sense, we know, for instance, I'm talking now about breast cancer, that the measures that currently are part of NCCN guidelines are actually discriminated to African American women for identifying women who need extra care, who are in increased risk of breast cancer. And in that population, it's in particularly dangerous because they get triple negative. So there is like a lot of issues that we are currently having. Now, when we are thinking about this question about potential dangers of AI, I would ask every member of the audience to think, when you last time went to your hospital, wherever it is located, how many of you, raise your hand if you actually had any AI in clinical practice? Did you experience as patients any AI? Please raise your hand or stand up so they can see you. None of us did. And actually another paper that I sent you from Stanford, from James Zhou Group, shows to us from, at the time there were 500 FDA-approved devices, and he looked at 5 years of American insurers, how many of these devices which have the codes were actually built, and the answer was almost none. It's nascent, it's nowhere to be found. So when we are thinking about what should we be worried about potential danger, yeah, of course it's good to think about, and we do need to be cognizant about it. Or should we be thinking about that, if you go to Eric Topol's talk that shows plenty of different tools, there is every day you open a new paper about great opportunities, and none of it almost is translated to medical care. And if you're looking at USPSTF guidelines, if you're looking at CCN guidelines, how much AI do you have there? USPSTF, none, and CCN, just one. The prostate tool, which has a lot of controversy already, but the point is that these AI tools are not even part of the clinical guidelines, so clearly insurers are not going to pay for it. So if possible, since the title of our panel, Lost in Translation AI, and you told us this beautiful story at the beginning, I think we should actually maybe focus our remaining 21 minutes thinking, how can we change the status quo? Because there is no point to develop new AI if it never gets translated, if insurance doesn't pay for it. And, we can, of course, improve the AI. I don't want to say that we shouldn't, but I would really encourage us to have this discussion.
No, and I appreciate that perspective, because I think, that story that I mentioned at the beginning, the stethoscope that we all think of today is not the form of version that exists today. And I think every medical innovation undergoes some evolution and development, and I think AI is no different. And people expect sort of this perfect solution from day one. But Regina, you did bring up the reimbursement issue. I mean, that is it seems like a huge bottleneck here. How have you seen any success stories of people being proactive, and what solutions can people implement there to sort of mitigate this reimbursement issue for some of these AI devices?
So it's actually an interesting question, and I was attending, I was in the House of Representatives, and the government is aware that we have a very serious issue. Even today in radiology, for instance, when you're introducing a new code, a new screening code, you need to remove one of the existing codes, which means that people who are sitting in these committees, who are not AI practitioners, they have, I wouldn't say bias, but they're predisposition is to actually keep the current system. So there are lots and lots of small things that add up that make it very hard. And we did see some limited success stories, but even with these success stories, previous panelists and speakers were talking about some of them. I wouldn't mention them, but I was recently visiting Emory University talking to their head of radiology, and he was saying that it doesn't, it doesn't pay off. They bought these particular tools, and the economics of it and the quality of care just doesn't work. And I think it's really a big open question how to change these equations. And I don't think that we have a lot of really amazing examples of how it was solved. And I know that Anthony has some interesting insight in our conversation, so maybe I would let him follow up.
Yeah, in our practice conversation for this, I made the mistake of observing that physicians have two motivations, which is to get paid more or sued less. And so any AI tool has to accomplish one of those two goals. On a more serious note, I very much agree that if I think about starting med school in 2001, which was an amazing time, the genome had just been sequenced, Gleevec was just coming out, the trials were reading out. If I thought about where would the world be today and where have we overperformed relative to where I thought we'd be in 2001 and where have we underperformed, I think it's clear that the amazing success story of the last 25 years has been new therapeutic modalities. It's just mesmerizing when you think about, genetic-based medicines that have come to be, gene therapies, all sorts of new therapeutic modalities. It's amazing. The area where I feel like we've most underperformed is in clinical decision support. And just every day, doctors make very big life and death decisions that have real impact on patients' lives. And we do them with essentially no decision support tools. And very few other industries look that way. Maybe education and government are the only other two. And you think of this when I practice cardiology, decisions like whether or not to put a valve into a patient, whether or not to start them on a blood thinner, whether to do bypass surgery or a stent. You think about the biggest moments in your life. These are some of them. And we make these huge decisions based on very crude human and biased human intuition. I hope that I live to see this change.
So,
I may just add something. It was very actually interesting to see how adoption of AI happens in pharmaceutical industry and in hospitals and clinical care, because I work on both sides. So at MIT, I lead MLPDS, which is a consortium of multiple pharmaceutical companies that are using our tools. And I remember when the first time, we kind of met in 2016, for majority of them, this whole notion of deep learning and molecules, and I went to Amgen, which is right across from my building at MIT. And it's amazing to see how much of these tools are really used across the industry. And because I'm on the SABs of a number of this company, I really see every single time something comes out, it is immediately utilized. Boltz is already tested and utilized from many, many pharmaceutical companies. Very, very different story in clinical care. You need to sell these tools, like we give it for free, but to go and convince and sell, and it's so, so difficult. So what you were saying, that the speed of adoption is really, the gap just continues to widen. I'm not sure what is the solution here.
And specifically on this, in fact, for us, we use most of this technology for helping us to improve our trial design. We use this for negotiations with payers. I will give you an example. How you can have a trials that has a 0.78 hazard ratio and say, guys, let's find this patient somewhere, you will see it's super easy. It doesn't work, in fact, anymore. So we can use this type of technology to identify a group of patients that will be best responder. Now, it's our own business model that we are shaping. We are defending zero system, actually, that will be marketed with a regulated way. We fail miserably with patient identification in terms of, for lung cancer, for example, incidentary nodule detection, super cool technology, cool deep learning aspect. But in fact, the pathways are not ready, in fact. So you have MDTs. The MDTs are just treating the patient. In the US, you pay for your MDT. In Europe, it's regulated by law. But the effect is exactly the same. We move more patients in the pathway. There is no business model behind, in fact. So you say, okay, guys, treat more these patients. We have nothing, in fact. So the problem is really all these tools that need to touch the decision of the physician are systems that we need to create. There is actually, for me, zero business model. Other example is diagnostic. We have tons of HRD prediction of status just by reading radiomics system. Super. GBRCA testing also to avoid the NGS, because honestly, NGS is not N, it's GS, and the GS is quite an old technology now, but it's very difficult to get access to NGS. So how you make happen, in fact, patients who are going in false negative most of the time with some mutations that nobody is able to actionate. And you say, guys, okay, it's a cool technology, but at the end, there is no business model. So this is, I'm not negative here, but I'm saying that probably there is some more discussion with guys like you at Danaher or anybody else, and say, guys, there is a call of action, in fact. If we want to bring this to the world, in fact, we need to fight for it, in fact. It's not just a cool idea.
So you know, just sort. Oh yeah, Philip, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that there's, you know, a certain amount of this discussion is very kind of focused on healthcare delivery in the United States because, you know, sadly that's where much of the economics for our industry come from. But we've been working over the last few years pretty closely with the NHS trusts in the United Kingdom, where there's a completely kind of different attitude, which is, can we start to use AI tools to actually improve, you know, the overall delivery of healthcare outcomes in the system? Because essentially it's the government that is paying, you know, and so there is a strong economic incentive, you know, from the institutions themselves to see if these tools are going to work better. And so it may well be that, you know, at some point the US will need to look to other jurisdictions, the UK, Canada, and Australia in particular, and say, okay, you know, the delivery of healthcare that has real difference in outcomes actually is using machine learning in a way that is perhaps not monetizable in the US.
And sorry, another point on this one, because we have some past life with Philippe, but we see also some stuff that work. With Philippe, in fact, we published a paper in a huge clinical trials that Amgen has created in cardiovascular disease, in reanalyzing our own trial to find the cardiovascular risk patients who has risk of dying from heart attack. And we published this paper with the TIMI group, and in fact, it has changed the way that the TIMI group and the guidelines has evolved in their understanding of the scoring risk. But what they are using is not the machine learning, is the feature that are extracted from the model. And they put this feature in their guidelines, and they say, guys, when you find this type of patient, you need to treat them like this and like this. It's not per se a machine learning system that is integrated in clinical practice. It's guideline, but it's not sufficient.
So, and we'll open it up for questions in a few minutes, so get your questions ready in the audience. You know, I love this dialogue because what it highlights is the role of incentives for each of the organization for both building the infrastructure and deploying AI. So what Regina highlighted is the difference between industry and healthcare systems, and I think it's been amplified by everyone else. And I guess it begs the question, you know, for the US specifically, because I think centralized healthcare systems have more incentive to potentially build the infrastructure and deploy it in a market like the US. I mean, what's going to be the end stage? Are we going to essentially have big players consolidate the data and the infrastructure and essentially have like what we have with cloud computing, where it's 3 big players owning 60% of the market share and really developing everything? Or is there an alternative sort of model of how we actually get the scale and the infrastructure and the efficiency to deploy it in a consistent way in a system like the US? And any thoughts there? Maybe Anthony?
Yeah, so I don't know. Let me start by saying it's really not clear to me. What is very clear, unfortunately, right now, is being in the world of drug development, is a great business. And then if you're not in the world of being a drug developer, being a payer is the second best business. And you see a lot of capital flowing into these two industries. Something that makes me very sad is that everyone agrees that the worst business in life sciences to be in is care delivery. And I really hope that that changes. What I think is a really important hinge point for the whole field is we focus a lot on cost, but value-based care is quality over cost. And we need to do two things at the same time. We need to both lower cost and we need to improve outcomes. Well, it's kind of straightforward to measure cost. I mean, again, the accounting can be complicated, but there's a real metric. Coming up with ways of measuring quality is much harder. And until we get better answers to that, I think we're going to be stuck in the position where we are now. Can AI be the tool by which we measure quality? Maybe. I haven't seen it yet, but I hope it happens.
Regina, yeah.
So even though I said, we are ready to go to prime time and there are economic incentives that stop AI from moving, I also want to actually, and I was listening to previous panels with the interest and the speakers, I think it's important, to understand the limitations, and not limitations of bias, but there are really serious limitations of the technology that require a new machine learning solutions that are not there. Let me just give you a simple example. Like your car, when you're driving your car, I don't drive, I don't have a license, but if you drive your car, you would see that, if something is wrong, you don't need to do interpretable mechanic. You just need to know that you need to bring this car to the garage and somebody is going to fix it, correct? Or like I use a coffee maker. If a coffee maker, flashes, I know something is wrong. Maybe we don't need to bring it to repair, man, but whatever, we can stop using it. Now, if you're thinking about all these big AI tools, we actually don't have capacity to say when the tool is out of its confidence level. You can say, but any deep learning model gives me a probability of the prediction. But we also know that these deep learning models are not calibrated. So it can be, maybe instead of mammogram, you got the picture, of your leg, it will give you a prediction. And because it's not calibrated, it may even give you a very high confidence in whatever prediction it makes. So these type of safety tools that kind of can alert provider and say, you shouldn't be trusting me on these patients. This is just one example. Or there is something that changes in the population. Lots of things, lots of this kind of safety mechanisms that exist in any other industry do not really exist in AI. And it's particularly troublesome because we're moving to the next generation of tools where humans cannot validate the prediction. If previously the speaker was talking about pathology reading, most of the time, the pathologist can actually validate the prediction of the machine. But if you are trying to take now data from single cell and imaging and everything, there are thousands of features, how the human can validate it? They cannot. So you really need to have a very safe kind of barriers to know that you cannot do it. This is just one example where technology is not quite there yet. So there are all these, and again, coming back to your question about bias, if you're looking at FDA regulation, FDA has a lot to say about bias, but it doesn't define what bias is. What does it mean it is not biased? If you checked it in 5 hospitals, does it mean it's unbiased? If I'm to make connection to the pharma industry, it's imagine that you're doing tox tests and they just say you need to make sure that it's not toxic. This is not how it works. There are very clear definition of toxicity and corresponding assay. So there is still all these, gaps of how we predict that the model is biased. Can we automatically do it? Because we cannot do it as humans. We need machines to do it. AI should be monitoring AI. So these type of technologies need still to be developed to ensure that we can do safe care delivery.
No, that's a great point. I mean, I think it's you develop these tools, but if you don't actually know the metric of how it's performing, to your example of the coffee machine, warning flashing light, or these other diagnostic flashpoints, it probably makes people really resistant to using it. Yes, David?
So based on this example, it's also funny. Do you know what is the technology that, or at least the statistical work that all the pharma industry is using for clinical trial interpretation? Kaplan-Meier.
Okay.
Okay. So Kaplan-Meier is a good, robust statistical methods that we use for the last 100 years. Probably, I don't know if it is 100, but some time. I don't know. But
Sounds right. Yeah.
yeah, it's something like this. But imagine that you came with your cool model and you talk with my statistician and you say, well, now we are doing a cross-nested validation of this multimodal stuff. In fact, these people don't get it. And so you have a learning curve that is absolutely necessary, in fact, to, at some point, these people will understand that they can use different type of technology. So it's just an example. I give you this example of a lot of our trials, for example, have some no control arm. So if you go in the US, it's okay. FDA is more kind to get some drug approved with a non-control arm. Difficult. If you go to Europe, it's impossible. But in Europe, we are trying to use covariate adjustment to say, guys, okay, what can we do with covariate adjustment? But you cannot imagine the discussion that we have with regulators when we are bringing this type of technology, in fact. It's like going to Mars. So there is a sort of curve, in fact, that everybody in this room needs to handle, and education is a key element, in fact. It's really a key element.
I think that's a very often overlooked point. Statistics and machine learning, so close and yet so far. As cultures, one is so conservative, one is so forward-leaning. One programs in R, one does Python. One is very comfortable with large data sets and likes to code. Another one likes theorem proving. So close and yet so far, and they often talk past each other.
So we'll open it up to the audience if there's any questions. Do I have any microphones or? Yes, right there in the back.
I was really struck by the comment that AI is really good with gaps in data. And I'm wondering if it can help with a major problem in growing that of long-term follow-up on clinical trials. You know, specifically in my narrow world of CRISPR gene editing or genetic medicine more broadly, the requirement is 15 years, but the outcomes can sometimes be curative and patients just move around. And you can't force them to come back every 3 months to give a blood draw. So do I understand correctly that AI's ability to wrangle sparse data could in fact be a path forward to try to learn how the patients are doing post-treatment?
Yeah, maybe I'll just, with appropriate training data, longitudinal imputation actually works quite well, and it works well, in cell biology in the lab where we can follow cells for weeks at a time and then interpolate what they were planning to do, and it works reasonably well with a longitudinal data set. So you can start to make these predictions, but the key thing is to have a really high quality training set that then enables that kind of long-range imputation.
Regina?
Missing data. So I think it's a super interesting question. If you use some multimodal model, in fact, you will see that, in fact, the feature don't have the same weight, in fact. But if you use only clinical data, meaning that the data that a physician is using in clinical practice, you will see that, for example, the radiomics are playing a huge role, in fact, in the weight of the disease. Now, is it a diagnostic? No, it's not a diagnostic, in fact. You need to have a real diagnostic to make the stuff happen. So, in fact, the machine learning could help you to find the feature that could be the right one to take the decision. And sometimes there is one missing. And it's okay. Physicians are doing this, it's pattern recognition.
Great. Well, on that note, I notice we're completely out of time. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you again, David, Regina, Anthony, and Philip for a really stimulating, thought-provoking discussion. Please join me in thanking the panelists.